Asterisk, asterisk. The Time Traveler's Secret Asterisk, asterisk. Max was an ordinary 12-year-old kid living in an ordinary town. He had ordinary friends, went to an ordinary school, and lived in a perfectly ordinary house. That was, of course, until the day he stumbled upon something far from ordinary: a time-traveling pocket watch. It all started on a rainy Saturday afternoon. Max's parents had decided it was the perfect day to clean out the old attic in his grandfather's house. His grandfather had passed away a year earlier, and the house had remained untouched ever since. Max remembered his grandfather as a quiet, mysterious man who loved books and strange trinkets. He was always tinkering with old clocks, watches, and strange mechanical devices, spending hours in his study lost in time, literally, as Max would soon discover. Max wasn't thrilled about spending his weekend clearing out a dusty attic, but his parents insisted it was time to go through Grandpa's things. Armed with a flashlight and a broom, Max climbed up the rickety stairs and into the attic. It was dark, musty, and filled with old boxes, cobwebs, and forgotten relics of the past. As he started sorting through old photo albums and newspapers, something shiny caught his eye. In the corner of the attic, hidden beneath a pile of old books, was a small, intricately designed box. It was made of dark wood with brass hinges, and it looked old, really old. Curious, Max brushed off the dust and opened the box. Inside, nestled in a bed of red velvet, was a pocket watch. But this wasn't just any pocket watch. It was unlike anything Max had ever seen. The watch was made of silver, with delicate engravings on its surface. The face was covered in small symbols, not numbers, and the hands of the watch didn't seem to move in any regular pattern. There was something strange, almost magical about it. As Max picked it up, the watch felt warm in his hand, as though it had a life of its own. He examined the watch closely, noticing a small dial on the side. Without thinking, Max turned the dial. Suddenly, the room around him began to spin. The boxes, the walls, the ceiling, all of it blurred together into a whirlwind of color and light. Max tried to shout, but no sound came out. His stomach flipped, and his vision went black. When the spinning finally stopped, Max opened his eyes, and he was no longer in the attic. He was standing in the middle of a vast desert. The heat was oppressive, and the sun blazed down from above. As Max looked around, he saw towering pyramids rising from the sand, their ancient stone faces weathered by time. Max's heart raced. How had he gotten here? Where was he? He glanced down at the pocket watch in his hand. It was glowing faintly, the symbols on its face shifting as if they were alive. "Is this real?" Max whispered to himself. Suddenly, he heard a voice behind him. "You there? What are you doing here?" Max whirled around to see a man in a linen robe, his head wrapped in cloth to shield him from the sun. The man looked suspicious, eyeing Max's strange clothes and the watch in his hand. I don't know," Max stammered, still trying to make sense of what had just happened. The man's eyes narrowed. "You shouldn't be here. This is the sacred land of the Pharaoh." Max quickly realized that wherever, or whenever, he was, it wasn't anywhere close to home. He needed to get out of there, fast. But how? He glanced down at the watch again, hoping it could somehow take him back. He fumbled with the dial, turning it in the opposite direction. The ground beneath his feet began to rumble, and the air shimmered around him. Before the man could say another word, Max was whisked away in another blinding swirl of light and color. When the world stopped spinning this time, Max found himself standing in the middle of a grand hall, surrounded by stone walls and flickering torches. Suits of armor lined the walls, and a long red carpet led to a massive throne. Max's jaw dropped as he realized where he was. He was inside a medieval castle. But before he could explore his new surroundings, a loud clanking noise echoed through the hall. Max turned to see two knights in full armor marching toward him. "Halt! Who goes there?" one of the knights demanded, his voice muffled by his helmet. Max froze. He didn't know what to say. He glanced down at the watch, hoping to disappear again. But before he could turn the dial, the knights grabbed him by the arms and dragged him down the hall. They led him into a small chamber where a man in a velvet robe sat behind a large wooden desk. The man looked up at Max with a curious expression. "And who might you be?" the man asked, leaning forward. Max. My name's Max," he said, trying to sound braver than he felt. The man raised an eyebrow. "Max, is it? And where do you come from?" Max wasn't sure how to answer that. He couldn't exactly say. "Oh, I'm from the future, and I accidentally time-traveled here with this magic pocket watch." "I'm from far away," Max said finally. The man studied Max for a moment before nodding slowly. "I see. Well, Max from far away, I have a task for you. A riddle, if you will. Solve it, and you may leave. Fail, and you'll stay here forever." Max's heart skipped a beat. A riddle? What kind of riddle? And what did he mean by stay here forever? But before Max could protest, the man leaned back in his chair and recited the riddle. "I have cities, but no houses. I have mountains, but no trees. I have water, but no fish. What am I?" Max's mind raced. He had no idea what the answer was, but he had to figure it out fast. The knights were standing behind him, their hands resting on their swords, waiting for his response. Suddenly, it clicked. "A map," Max blurted out. "The answer is a map." The man's eyes widened in surprise. Then he smiled. "Very clever, Max. You are free to go." Before Max could even thank him, the man waved his hand, and the world around Max began to blur again. The castle, the knights, the man, they all faded into nothingness as the familiar swirling colors surrounded him once more. When the spinning stopped, Max found himself back in the attic of his grandfather's house. He let out a sigh of relief, his heart still pounding from the whirlwind adventure. But as he looked down at the watch in his hand, he realized something. The dial was still glowing, and the hands were still moving. Max had thought his adventure was over, but it was just beginning. The watch wasn't just a one-time thing. It was a time travel device, and it had transported him to another era. But why? What was the purpose of all this? And more importantly, how was he supposed to control it? Max didn't have long to ponder these questions, because suddenly, the watch began to glow even brighter. The symbols on its face started spinning rapidly, and before Max could react, he was whisked away again, this time to a place even more unfamiliar. When the spinning stopped, Max found himself standing in the middle of a bustling city. But this wasn't like any city he had ever seen before. The buildings were tall and made of shining metal. and strange vehicles zipped through the air above him. Everything looked sleek, futuristic, and perfect. Max's eyes widened in awe. He had traveled to the future. But before he could take it all in, a loud voice rang out across the square. "Citizen, halt!" Max turned to see a group of figures in silver uniforms marching toward him. They were holding strange, glowing weapons, and their faces were covered by smooth, metallic masks. Oh, Max muttered under his breath. He had a feeling these guys weren't friendly. He quickly ducked behind a nearby building, his heart pounding in his chest. He needed to figure out what was going on. Why was the watch sending him to all these different places? Was there a pattern? Was there something he was supposed to do in each time period? As Max crouched behind the building, he examined the watch again. The symbols were still shifting, but this time they seemed to be forming a pattern, a puzzle of some kind. Max stared at the symbols, trying to make sense of them. There were 5 symbols in total: a pyramid, a castle, a star, a clock, and a key. Suddenly, it hit him. The watch wasn't just sending him to random places. It was sending him on a quest. Each time period he visited had something to do with one of the symbols. He had already visited the pyramid, ancient Egypt, and the castle, medieval times. That meant the next stop would be the star, possibly the future he was now in. But what was he supposed to do here? Max knew he had to solve a puzzle or complete a task in each era to move forward. But so far, he had no idea what the task in this futuristic city was. As he pondered his next move, the ground suddenly shook. The sound of explosions echoed through the air, and Max peeked around the corner of the building to see chaos erupting in the square. The figures in silver uniforms were fighting against something. Max couldn't quite make it out, but it looked like a giant, mechanical creature, a robot of some kind, towering over the buildings and smashing everything in its path. Max's heart raced. He didn't want to get involved, but something told him that this was the puzzle he needed to solve. The city was under attack, and it was up to him to stop it. But how could a 12-year-old kid from the present stop a giant robot in the future? Max thought quickly. He needed to get closer to the robot, but without being seen by the silver-uniformed soldiers. He darted through the alleyways, making his way toward the massive mechanical beast. As he got closer, he noticed something strange. There was a small panel on the robot's leg, and it was open, exposing a series of wires and circuits. It looked like the robot had been tampered with. Maybe someone had sabotaged it, causing it to go berserk. Max's mind raced. If he could get to that panel and fix the circuits, maybe he could stop the robot. Summoning all the courage he had, Max ran toward the robot, dodging debris and ducking under falling metal beams. The ground shook beneath his feet, and the air was filled with the sound of destruction. But Max didn't stop. He knew this was his puzzle to solve. When he reached the robot's leg, he climbed up to the open panel and quickly began inspecting the wires. His grandfather had taught him a little bit about mechanics, and though he wasn't an expert, he recognized enough to know what needed to be done. With trembling hands, Max reconnected the loose wires and reset the circuits. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a loud hiss, The robot's movements slowed. Its glowing red eyes dimmed, and it stopped its rampage. Max let out a sigh of relief. He had done it. He had solved the puzzle. But before he could celebrate, the watch began to glow again. The symbols on its face shifted, and the next symbol, the clock, lit up. Max knew what was coming. The watch was about to take him to the next era, the next puzzle. But this time, Max was ready. He wasn't just a kid anymore. He was a time traveler, and his adventure had only just begun.